Intel has now officially returned to its old ways and has launched a new generation of processors, the 14th generation of its desktop processors, which has very, very little of a new generation, since it is completely the same as the 13th generation, and only they have raised the frequencies of their processors a bit so that they can perform a little more and to update the name and to make it seem like they are selling a completely new generation to compete with AMD, which with its Ryzen 7000 generation of processors has eaten their portion of the cake. In today's video, we are going to analyze this Intel launch, the 14th generation of Intel processors, and we are going to see if these processors are worth it, if they really perform more than the previous generation, and what are the best options, the best processors of today, so that if you want a new PC, or if you want to update the processor of your current PC, now on Black Friday, for example, which we have just around the corner, then you have a video in which we review the best processors so you can choose correctly based on your needs. First of all, the reason why I say that Intel is going back to its old ways is that this new generation of processors maintains the same architecture and design as the previous generation of processors. Therefore, the Raptor Lake architecture is still used, in this case called Raptor Lake Refresh, so Intel itself is already supporting it. These are some rehashes of the 13th generation of processors. What changes? Well, the frequencies are raised a little, the turbo frequencies, but in exchange, as we will see later, temperatures and consumption also rise. So in the end, by overclocking, surely your 13th generation processor will be performing exactly the same as these new 14th generation processors. The good thing is that Intel hasn't risen too much either. The launch prices have a fairly similar price, a bit higher than what the 13th generation processors currently have, something that is obvious since Intel is not in a position right now to be asking for absolutely ridiculous prices. They cannot do now the same thing they did before, when they released new generations of processors, putting them at stratospheric prices when they were simple rehashes. Now we have competition from AMD, which, as I always say, is super positive, since the only beneficiary in this situation is the consumer. If we analyze the list of processors that Intel has already announced that are coming out first, we see changes that are actually super small. Compared to the previous generation, we still have very well-defined ranges. First, we have the i9, which would be the highest range with the 14900K and the 14900KF, which are processors that have a total of 24 cores, adding the 8 high-power cores plus the 16 high-efficiency cores and a total of 32 threads. Since those 8 high-power cores also have 16 threads, to which the 16 efficiency cores are added. So in total, Intel is selling you 24 cores, 32 threads. But actually keep in mind that these processors are more of a high-performance 8-core, 16-thread processor, which are ultimately the important ones and the ones you need if you want maximum performance, for example, in games or other highly demanding tasks. These models now reach 6 gigabytes of turbo frequency, something that is truly outrageous, which is very important in gaming, for example, but which also causes problems, since, as we will see later, these processors are reaching super high temperatures. Consequently, in part of these very high frequencies, then we have, as until now, the i7, which would be processors with, in this case, 20 cores, 8 high-performance cores plus 12 efficiency cores, in total 28 threads. The truth is that they are processors that are quite similar to the i9, so the truth is that I would not see that difference of almost $200 as being too justified. These i7s, although they have a little less frequency, in the end they still maintain those 8 cores and 16 high-performance threads, so the performance in games, despite also having a little less cache, the truth is that it will be quite a bit equal. That is why the i7 has always been an option, in my opinion, superior to the i9 in terms of quality and price, but the i5 is also still a super good option, since in this case it includes 14 cores, with 6 high-performance cores and 12 threads and 8 efficiency cores. In this case, the difference with the i7 is not too pronounced, and that is why if you want a PC that gives you maximum performance and lasts the maximum number of years, the i7, generally in terms of quality and price, could be a more interesting option. But for gaming currently, if you use a high-end graphics card, for example an i5 14600K or the 14600KF, which would be the same processor but without integrated graphics, any graphics card on the market will be supporting you without creating a bottleneck, unless you play on 1080p and more than 300 FPS, for example. In that case, the i9 would be giving you a little more mileage. But in general situations, if you use your PC logically, these i5 processors are more than enough for you and any regular user. The difference with the previous generation, with the 13th generation of Intel processors, I already told you that range by range is practically non-existent, but also in prices. The truth is that there hasn't been much difference. This new generation is a little more expensive than what the 13th generation is costing right now. So taking into account that the 13th generation is also going to drop a bit in price, the truth is that it is not an entirely bad launch, since that will allow us to buy at least the 13th generation somewhat cheaper. And taking into account that by overclocking those processors, you will be achieving the same performance as the 14th generation. Well, the truth is that it is not an entirely bad launch. Of course, let's now compare the 14th generation Intel with the Ryzen 7000, which is the direct competition and is the reason why Intel has launched these rehashes to say that the new most powerful processor in the world would be the i9 14900K, the contender. This processor would be the Ryzen 9 7950X3D, which in the end, despite having twice as many high-performance cores, has 16 cores and 32 high-performance threads. And it also has, thanks to its architecture and the 3D cache, a much larger L3 cache. And despite all this, it also consumes less thanks to being built in a 5-nanometer manufacturing process compared to Intel's 7 nanometers, which would actually be more equivalent to 10 nanometers in terms of transistor volume. So, although in these Intel processors you have much higher frequencies that benefit you a lot later in terms of temperatures, consumption, the truth is that these processors are not so on par with AMD right now, and the queen, at least in terms of technology and specifications, I believe it is still from AMD. Furthermore, a super important detail in the comparison of Ryzen 7000 against the 14th generation Intel is undoubtedly the platform, since Intel, with this 14th generation, is saying goodbye to the LGA 1700 socket, which is the most current socket and platform of Intel in which you have 12th, 13th, and 14th generation Intel processors. But the next generation, which will be released in exactly a year, will carry a completely new socket. The 15th generation processors will no longer be compatible with current motherboards, so we could really expect a completely new architecture from Intel. And again, we would see a small revolution to start competing again with AMD. What the Ryzen 7000 offers you is the AM5 platform that they have just released with these same processors, so you have a much longer useful life. If you buy a Ryzen 7000 now with an AM5 650 chipset motherboard, for example, it would be the last one. Then you could in 3 or 4 years buy a Ryzen 8000, 9000, or whatever you want, and you could be using that same motherboard. It is something that has made AMD very big with this new AM4 platform, and it is a large part of why they have eaten up so much ground on Intel in terms of sales. AMD is now undoubtedly the one that offers you the most complete and most durable platform over time, and the one that makes the most sense today, in my humble opinion. If we compare these 14th generation processors with the 13th generation processors and the Ryzen 7000, the truth is that the difference is practically non-existent in terms of performance. Intel may have a slight advantage in gaming, although in the higher ranges, AMD continues to remain stronger with processors with 3D cache, which has turned out to be a quite interesting technology that in gaming the truth is that it has quite a few benefits, but then, in general, the truth is that in the rest of the ranges, both the 13th and 14th generation Intel, the truth is that they are quite similar to the Ryzen 7000. Something quite important to keep in mind is that the Ryzen 7000 are somewhat cheaper, although both the motherboards and the RAM with which it is compatible are more expensive in these Ryzen 7000. Intel continues to maintain compatibility with DDR4 RAM, but also with DDR5 RAM. Depending on the motherboard you choose for these processors, you can have one RAM or another accompanying the processor. Obviously, if with Intel you also mount a DDR5 motherboard and DDR5 RAM, the price will be quite similar to the motherboard and RAM in Ryzen. So the price difference in the processors, which is actually quite notable. A Ryzen 5 or 7600X, for example, is costing about $250, $300, while the new 14600 are almost $400. This difference, obviously, I believe, is insurmountable on the part of Intel. And today, also taking into account that the AM5 platform gives you much more durability and much more solidity, I believe that it tips the balance quite a bit in favor of AMD. In the end, looking at the differences in performance in gaming, which is what most people who watch these videos are most interested in, the differences are very, very small, and the price is obviously a super important factor that we have to take into account before making a recommendation. So, as a summary, I would say that Intel has launched a new generation of processors, a new generation of rehashes. Intel is back to its old ways, and right now you can buy a 10th generation processor for less money that, with a slight overclock, will perform exactly the same as a 14th generation one, since everything is maintained in these new processors. Both the architecture and the manufacturing process, like the motherboards, only raise the frequencies a bit and little else, and this in turn means that AMD can breathe easy and its Ryzen 7000 become the best next-gen alternative today. Today, since they have the incredible benefit of having an AM5 platform that is new and that will have much more support for more years. But tell me, what do you think of this new release from Intel? What processor would you buy between the 13th, 14th Intel or the Ryzen 7000? Leave me your opinion below. Also leave your big likes and your subscription if you liked the video, and be very attentive by activating the bell, since soon we are going to bring the best CPU plus GPU combos for this Black Friday that is just around the corner. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.